For 99% of content in ESO as a tank, you'll be either running around with a sword and board or ice staff. Which one is better is not black and white, and both have benefits and downsides. A quick opinion is I like to use double ice staff for majority of tanking, however sword and board does have its use cases. Starting off, I want to go over the pros and cons of sword and shield. Sword and shield has 3 major benefits over ice staffs. Firstly, since you're using a shield, you have access to another armor slot, kind of. Shields are basically armor in ESO, letting you use an armor trait and armor enchantments. This enables you to have slightly higher resource pools overall, letting you use tri-stat enchants and allows you to use the extra armor trait like reinforced or divines. Shields also have an innate armor stat, making them a lot easier to hit armor cap overall. The second major benefit sword and shields have over ice staffs is the ability to regenerate stamina with a heavy attack. Newer tanks may end up struggling with stamina sustain due to perm blocking. With a sword and shield, you can heavy attack to gain stamina back. The last major benefit comes from the active and passive abilities within the skill line. Sword and Shield has access to a skill called Puncture. This is a taunt that also applies major and minor breach. Along with this, they have skills that give 10% block mitigation and decrease block cost. Sword and Shield also has access to a unique 14% block mitigation to ranged attacks from their passives. Overall, while Sword and Shield has a lot less offensive capabilities than Ice Staff, Sword and Shield does have a lot of defensive capabilities to make up for this. I really quickly want to go over the downsides of Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield has a couple of downsides, the major one being the inability to backbar it. Before going further with this, yes, you can put a Sword and Shield on your backbar. However, with the prevalence of the Crusher enchant on a two-handed infused weapon, Sword and Shield just cannot make up the difference. The other problem Sword and Shield has backbarring is the fact it doesn't have a good dot to place on the ground, giving you easy access to your enchant on backbar. This basically just means you won't be able to fire your backbar enchant on cooldown without having to worry about going to your backbar and hitting something with your sword. The other problems with Sword and Shield have come around recently due to the introduction of the new Inner Fire taunt. I would have considered Puncture as a really good option for Sword and Shields, however with the Inner Fire change you will basically only ever be using this taunt as the synergy from it is just way too strong. Other than that, we have skills like Defensive Stance, which is super strong in niche circumstances, and skills like Power Bash, which are only used when you're running the Void Bash set. Now I want to go over Ice Staff's pros and cons and then compare the two. Ice Staffs have some benefits that differ from Sword and Shields. Ice Staffs are a two-handed weapon, meaning their weapon enchants are immediately doubled in power. Ice Staffs also gain the ability to use Wall of Elements to apply their enchantments over time. Wall of Elements is also able to proc Minor Breach and AoE. Ice Staffs also have access to other good skills like Destructive Clench, but this also has the same problem Puncture does with the new Inner Fire changes. This taunt, instead of applying Major Minor Breach, applies Minor Brittle and Major Maim. It's a good defensive option for the group, however Inner Fire is just so much better than it right now. Along with these two, all the other skills are useful in some way. Skills like Pulsar that apply Minor Mangle and Area Effect, making all non-major enemies drop their maximum health by 10% for 10 seconds. This effectively lets the tank do around 10k damage to every enemy in AoE in most trials. Ice Staffs also have access to Elisus, which applies Major Breach and Chilled, Concussed, and Burning. Ice Staffs also have access to a couple of very strong passives, giving them a 100% higher chance to apply status effects and reducing block cost by 36% and block mitigation by 20%. The last benefit Ice Staffs gives is if you're running 2 Ice Staffs, you can open up a skill slot on your backbar, not having to run a second taunt. Going over some of the Ice Staff's downsides, one of the Destruction Staff's passives is actually just terrible. It actively makes your sustain worse, and there's really no reason to ever have it. Bright Focus is kind of bait for tanks, as using your Magicka as your block will make it so that whenever you're blocking you will not be regenning Magicka, and 90% of your skills will be using Magicka as a tank. This passive will basically make your sustain worse for absolutely no reason and no benefit to you. The other major downside is for the skill Destructive Clench. Like Puncture, it runs into the issue of Inner Fire being such a good synergy for the group that there's really no point to running Destructive Clench anymore. Comparing the two, they have a lot of similarities and some differences. The main thing we can look at between the two is the cons, as most of the benefits of one are the downsides of the other. Starting off, we can look at the major stat benefits from each. We can see that Sword and Shield gives more base attributes and extra armor trait, while Ice Staffs give higher weapon and spell damage while also having stronger enchants. So if we go with a Sword and Shield, our stamina, health, and magic pools will be higher, giving us a higher skill capacity overall and an extra armor trait like Divines. If we go with an ice staff, it means our weapon and spell damage will be higher and we'll get stronger end chance. This also means stuff that requires weapon and spell damage will be a lot stronger. I say a lot stronger, however, with how low tank's weapon spell damage is, it's not that big of a difference. The last thing I want to go over really quickly is scribing. I left this out of the pros and cons because there really isn't pros and cons to each of them. One of the skills is insane, the other one is absolutely horrid. And with how this video is kind of crapped on shields, you would probably expect that the sword and shield one is the bad one. However, the destruction staff scribing skill is just kind of terrible. There's no real reason to ever use it. So let's start off with that one. Elemental Explosion is quite honestly probably the worst skill you can use with a destruction staff, as a 2-second cast time is just atrocious, and if you get heavied or anything happens within that cast time and you have to block, you just lose whatever you were doing within that. The reason this 2-second cast time is so bad is, imagine if you were an off tank and you were running around and the main tank was trying to pull a group of enemies on top of it. If they move just slightly out of where you placed it, you can't change where you wanted it to go. So if they move out of it, you just wasted 2 GCDs for nothing. Other than this too, if something hits you within that time with a heavy or anything that would CC you or stop you from casting, you're just losing whatever progress you made. I can't emphasize enough how much I think this 2-second cast time is just atrocious and stupid. It also can apply Burning, Chilled, Concussed, and AoE, which is nice. However, Elisus is able to do the same thing, and since your healers and your main tank and you will probably be running this, it's really not that big of a deal to apply it to the major targets within a group. This is all bad for this skill, however, its one saving grace is its ability to apply off balance and AoE. However, Necros can do this easily with Scythe. This skill sucks and I hate it. As for the sword and shield skill, I want to make a video dedicated to the skill as it has probably not an intentional interaction with most things in the game. However, for this video I will go over it a little bit, but I want to go over the overall skill a lot more. Starting off, we can look at its focus scripts. It gets access to pull, multi-target frost damage, and taunt. This is a lot of very good options for a skill. Quick side note, because I know not everyone will know this, but the frost damage is being added in the PTS patch. The skill has access to a lot of good signatures, however, the one I would always use is Fencer's Parry. It lets you do some stupid things that I'll go over in a different video if it doesn't get nerfed. Another quick side tangent thing, the reason I'd want to put in a different video is what Fencer's Parry can do is really stupid, and it does a lot of stuff that I don't think is really what they want it to do. One quick example of things it can do is in stuff like Dreadsail Reef or other trials where if you take a heavy attack you get applied a heal absorb. You can completely negate this heal absorb by throwing Fencer's Parry at it, and then you just reflect the damage and it's just you don't get the debuff. Going on to the main reason I love this skill, and the main reason I actually use a sword and shield in any sort of content. Looking at its affixes, one stands out a lot, off balance. In 4-man content, off balance isn't really something you can control all too well because you're probably using a lightning staff and Elisus, so if you're doing Elisus for breach, you're just going to put it on it and a lightning staff's going to go down, it's going to proc off balance right away. If you want to time it, you can put it on this skill and then drop the lightning staff. This makes off balance a lot more controllable and lets you proc it when you want to inside of burns within 4-man content. Other than this, however, it has major vitality, major maim, major evasion, major resolve, and major cowardice. These are all great options for defensive purposes, however, I would mainly go for major vitality as it's a decently hard buff to get. But that's it for the end of this video. Like almost all my endings, there's no real script here. I just wanted to say I like making these educational videos as tanking for me, trying to learn it over the years. It's not the easiest thing to learn, as a lot of the information is just do it until you figure it out. There's a lot of good guides coming out now with better tanks making guides and stuff about how to do things. However, there's still a lot of small details with tanking that not many people get taught very quickly. You just kind of have to try and figure it out for yourself. But I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, that video might happen, it might not. We'll see how the last week of PTS works out. If it doesn't get nerfed, well, it's getting made.